Shalom, everybody, from Jerusalem. We are here looking at the last conflict that Israel had with Hamas in Gaza. And we have here a great panel of experts that will share their insights and will help you to find the tools of combating these arguments that you are bombarded with through the mass media. So what made Israel to respond really with the counterattacks?
Well, it's not counterattacks, it's an act of self-defense. You have to understand, we're talking about a vicious, murderous terror organization. This is like the Palestinian ISIS. They are a destabilizing factor in this region. Don't forget, Albert, we were enjoying the winds of change and hope in the Middle East after the Abraham Accord. And as Chaim said, internal political Palestinian issues, the Hamas desire to take control over the Palestinian agenda and to weaken the Palestinian Authority, the Fatah movement, this is what caused this entire campaign, the loss of lives, etc., the destruction that we have witnessed to both sides. Now, we have suffered more than 4,000 rockets that were fired at us from within civilian centers in the Gaza Strip, okay? The Hamas is using their own population as human shields. This is a war crime. They are the worst enemies of their own population. And then, second thing, they are launching these rockets towards most populated civilian centers in Israel. And their desire is to cause as many Israelis killed as possible and to injure as many Israelis. And by the way, regardless of their nationality, color, race, whatever, we had Muslim Arabs killed, we had workers from India killed during this campaign. They shoot at us indiscriminately. Can you imagine? Israel is a relatively small country. It is more or less the size of New Jersey. More than 4,000 rockets fired at us indiscriminately. What country would have endured such a thing? So we had to protect ourselves, and we had to protect our civilians, and we had to make sure that this terrorist infrastructure is being destroyed. Okay, so I think one has to say that really Israel tried to do the most measured and accurate military campaign possible. We really targeted only military targets, all their terror infrastructure, their tunnels of terror that were about to be used in order to kidnap Israelis and to launch terror attacks, the launchers of all these rockets, the manufacturing sites, and so on and so forth. Again, when you look at the situation, it is so painful because they are using the Palestinians themselves as their guardians, as their human shields, and they fire at us from hospitals, from mosques, from kindergartens. They really have no mercy, no emotions to their own population, and they are trying to kill as many Israelis as possible. We had to protect ourselves, and we had to make sure that this terrorist infrastructure is being destroyed and eliminated.
So, what parties actually fuel the conflict, and what do they gain from this conflict?
Well, I'll tell you in short. Radicals, they fuel this conflict. Hamas, they want to defame the state of Israel by showing that we are committing war crimes and that we are criminals. They used an excuse to launch these rockets at Israeli civilians. They said that Israeli police is breaking into Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they showed terrifying visuals. And when you see that on the media, they basically leave you one option to say what in the world is the Israeli police is doing over there. But the truth is that these radicals were actually throwing rocks at Israeli police. They were launching, firing fireworks. at our police. And then they run to hide inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And you have to ask yourself this one important question. Have they lost their respect to this holy site? Because the Temple Mount is holy not only to the Jews. We had our 2 temples on that mount. It is also holy to Muslims and Christians alike. And under Israeli sovereignty, all religions are able to worship there freely. So by throwing rocks at that site, they basically show that they have no respect to their own mosque as well. And I can tell you another thing. What do they gain from that? Hamas wants to defame Israel, as I've said earlier. They use their very, I would say, good propaganda machine, because the media is falling for that. I was an IDF soldier. I served in the Armored Corps. I was a combat medic. And I can tell you that I have treated more Palestinians and Syrians than I ever treated Israelis. As an IDF combat medic, I saved the lives of Palestinians and I saved the lives of Syrians. Right now in Israeli hospitals, you have Gazan civilians being treated in our hospitals. I have seen it with my own eyes at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. If I, an Israeli citizen, entered the Gaza Strip, would I come back alive? Probably not. And that's something that the world has to understand, that the media is being used, unfortunately, as a tool in the hands of these terrorists. And again, Iran is the one that is standing behind these terrorist organizations. Iran, the Islamic regime in Iran, is fueling Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Houthis in Yemen. They basically sponsor 99% of terrorism in the Middle East. And this is just outrageous to think that the media is focused on the war crimes that we are supposedly committing and totally turning a blind eye to what's happening within Iran and the war crimes that are being committed by the Islamic regime in Iran.
So has this conflict been somewhat different from the earlier conflicts that we've had with Gaza?
On one hand, it's the same old story. We just recently celebrated 73 years to the foundation of the Israeli Defense Forces. So for 73 years, terrorist attacks and terrorist groups have been trying to harm Israeli citizens inside the state of Israel. And for 73 years, the IDF has been defending Israeli citizens. And we've been doing everything we can to make sure that they don't damage or harm or kill Israelis. And so on one hand, it's the same old story. And on the other hand, what we've seen recently is a complete decision by Hamas and other terrorist groups inside the Gaza Strip to try to overwhelm our systems and do everything that they can to harm Israeli citizens. So for example, we have the Iron Dome aerial defense system, one of our best aerial defense systems, combat proven, 90% success rate. So over 4,000 rockets, massive rocket barrages launched from the Gaza Strip at Israeli citizens, and the Iron Dome has a success rate of about 90%. And these terrorist groups have been doing everything they can do recently to try to overwhelm the system, and they haven't been successful. In addition, this past operation, we have been focusing on destroying military enemy infrastructure without putting in a single Israeli soldier inside the Gaza Strip, and we've done that successfully. We've carried out airstrikes and artillery strikes and all different kinds of fire support, where we can destroy enemy capabilities, stockpiling, terror tunnels, all of these different infrastructures, which are military, combatant, and they are designed to hurt Israeli citizens, and we have been destroying those capabilities in order to keep Israelis safe.
Well, so what actions did Israel really take to prevent the casualties?
Oh, well, that's an easy one. What no other army has had to do and what no other army has done. You might recall in 2008, the Goldstone report of the UN that accused Israel of war crimes. We realized we had a problem. We had a terrorist sordid bloc in Gaza who takes advantage of their own citizenry to store weapons caches in apartment complexes, schools, mosques, UN buildings, hospitals. I wonder which direction is the war crime. So we had to undertake what no army has ever undertook. We acquired all the numbers of the military sites that Hamas, the civilian sites that Hamas used to store their military weapons. And I want to give you some statistics from where our moral actions come from in times of war. During Operation Cast Lead, this is in 2008, there was 2.5 million leaflets dropped warning civilians to leave the territory, 165,000 phone calls made, and over a dozen what we call Hekesh Agag, roof knocking, where basically this is a weakened kind of firework, an explosive device, which shakes the building, drops on the roof, warns people to get out. That's step one. Then drones have video where they see the people leaving, exiting the premises. That's step two. The footage is given to the HQ. The base says to the IDF in the sky, now all civilians have left the building, and only then do we drop. Can you name another army that does that, that engages that? I cannot. But yet, in this paradoxical fallen world, we're the ones that are accused of war crimes. In the latest conflagration, we didn't have a ground operation, and we were very welcome of the ceasefire that came after 10, 11 days. And, but we employed the humane and ethical tactics that we usually do. But then you have the moral numerologists who like to kind of draw up a statistics of how many died on one side and how many died on another, and extort from that number some type of moral conclusion. It's usually called moral equivalency, but I don't even call it moral equivalency because they don't conflate Israel with Hamas. They confuse Israel with Hamas. This is more of a moral reversal. Well, for one, if they were to equalize Israel to Hamas, that would be giving Israel too much credit because that would legitimize them in their eyes too much. People should keep in mind that according to that sophist way of thinking, I suppose Nazi Germany was right in World War II because more German civilians died as opposed to the British. This is sophistry, this is casuistry, and it's more than shameful from someone who's originally American myself to see congressional leaders buying into this narrative and people, talk show hosts accusing us of apartheid, and I think of certain US congresswomen saying the same. And especially someone in that position should know better.
So what did this conflict cost Israel? What losses?
First of all, we have 13 casualties, and we really grieve the loss of every innocent life. I want to say from both sides, we grieve the loss of every innocent life that has been taken during this campaign. And on top of that, you have to understand that this murderous terrorist organization has cost us a loss of about 7 billion shekels. That's the economic loss, according to the estimates of different economists here in Israel. It's about $2.5 billion. Okay, and it's not only military expenditures, meaning Iron Dome infrastructure or Air Force strikes. It's also the fact that all our school system was closed. Okay, kindergartens, schools, high schools, all of them were closed. Our airport was shut down because they were launching their rockets at our airport. All the commerce and trade was closed. So really, we have suffered a great economic loss. Of course, first and foremost, we have casualties, and we have hundreds of people that are both physically and mentally injured. You know, in Sderot, when you go to the surrounding Gaza area, and you meet the people that live there, and they lived for the last 2 decades under this terror threat on a daily basis. They get barrages of rockets that fall on their homes, and they have only 5 to 10 seconds to run for their lives. And you know, I met with a woman whose son is 18 years old, and he still wets in his bed. And you find a lot of kids, a lot of children that are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is something that they will have to carry for the rest of their lives. So really, it is a very, very painful loss. But I have to say, we also grieve the loss of lives of innocent Palestinians. At the end of the day, they are our neighbors and we have to live together. And to see the amount of suffering on the Palestinian side caused by this terrorist organization that has taken them hostage is also terrible for us, because violence will lead to violence. And if we want to bring a better future for our children and for our great-grandchildren, we need to work on positive, constructive foundations. And when you see what Hamas does with the money it gets, you know, Hanania spoke before about the financing mechanisms of terror. And Chaim says, show me the money. And indeed, if they would have taken all the money that was poured at them from the international community, if it's United Nations agencies or if it's donor countries, and if they have invested it in their infrastructure, building a strong economy, a welfare system that would bring joy and welfare to their own population, we could have lived beautiful life, you know, secured and safe and peaceful life next to each other. So again, the international community has to make sure that all these radical ideologies that call to wipe out Israel and see nothing but Hamas or jihadi waqf in the holy sites, we have to make sure that all these ideologies are being they fade away. They do not exist any longer.
During this kind of a conflict, I think our audience, our friends are bombarded with horrible pictures of little children being killed, and they have no clue where these pictures were taken from. They don't know whether it's true or not. And you have been able to really provide some very helpful, handy images, pictures, and video clips to empower our friends.
First of all, I have to say that there were casualties in Gaza. There were Palestinians that died. And as an Israeli, it breaks my heart. Does the world think that we are happy about anyone that dies? Does the world think that our soldiers are enjoying being at the border rather than staying at home? Obviously not. You know, throughout this operation, we have seen a lot of different images, and surprisingly, the vast majority of them didn't even come from Gaza. You know, I even saw politicians around the world, members of parliament, sharing these images that, you know, that I can tell you in particular. There was this image of a little beautiful girl that, you know, they said that she died from an airstrike inside the Gaza Strip. And they said, well, they even gave this girl a name. But what we found out is that, well, this beautiful girl is actually a Russian child model that still, you know, she's alive and she's having a, you know, great time in Russia. And that, you know, you are seeing a lot of fake news on social media. It is honestly hard to believe this. And that's why I want to add to what Sharon and Chaim have said, that you know, Hamas does not care for their own people. They would rather use real images because they want their people to die as long as they can blame it on Israel. So these fake news that we are witnessing are troubling, because people abroad who may support Israel are questioning, is the country that I support is committing war crimes? Are these children died? And is this information that I'm seeing right now is real or not?
In regards to the battle, how does Hamas's methods of engaging in operations differ from Israel?
It's ridiculous to compare them at all, because on one hand we have the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, whose goal is to protect Israeli citizens. We are an army of a democratic country, And on the other hand, we have a terrorist organization whose stated goal is to kill and harm Israeli citizens and civilians. So you can't really compare the two causes and the two goals. But we've seen rocket barrages from within civilian territories in the Gaza Strip. They shoot from schools and hospitals and mosques, and we watch these rocket launches from these heavily populated civilian areas inside the Gaza Strip in order to kill and harm Israelis in the state of Israel. And so that's a terrorist organization. And on the other hand, we have the IDF, an army of a democratic state. And what we do is we protect our civilians, we defend our country. And so that's our goal. I work in fire support. So what I do in the army is I identify military targets. We research these targets, we plan our attacks, and we make sure that we carry out these attacks in the most surgical, precise way that we can. That's my job. That's what we do, my colleagues and I. And so our goal is to destroy this military organization, these terrorists inside the Gaza Strip, destroy this infrastructure, and make sure that they can't have the ability to harm our citizens.
Hamas provoked this conflict. But what was their goal? And what was Israel's goal with this battle?
Well, as far as Israel goes, I think it was one of the Platonic dialogues. Plato made the point that peace is a parenthesis. When you read history of war, war is the main body, and peace comes in parentheses. Israel hopes one day to extract that peace from its parenthetical confinement, but in the meantime, we want to extend it for as long as possible. When we do these operations, we're hoping to get as many years as we can of quietus. As far as Hamas goes, in the short term, well, in the long term, they want to impose, basically, if you read their charter, it reads like a modern day Mein Kampf, the original 88 charter. Even with their updated modern modifications, the Charter 2.0, if anybody believes that just because they took out their racist and anti-Semitic tropes that were in the original one, if you believe them, I'll leave the ... there. As far as the short term, military goals of Hamas and propaganda goals of Hamas, I believe they achieved them, to tell you the truth. They achieved international recognition of their cause and condemnation of Israel through the propaganda machine. They achieved a large tranche of the American Congress calling Israel an apartheid state, accusing us of ethnic cleansing. They achieved John Oliver calling us baby killers. I think that they are more than satisfied for the sacrifices that they made of their own people and our own for the propagandistic benefits that redounded to them.
Well, I'm asking the same question that I asked Hanania. People, when they are bombarded, our friends that are bombarded by these images and what the mass media brings to them, where can they find the arguments? Where can they find the tools to counter them?
First of all, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has a very elaborated website. So you can Google MFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Israel, MFA.gov.il, and you will find all the talking points. You will find a lot of video clips. You will find a lot of footage that shows all these fake news that Hanania spoke about, all the lies that Hamas is spreading, all this public affairs campaign that is based on nothing. And you will find all the footage that can help you understand the real thing, the real events, and the real causes for this conflict. And you will find also the answers that you can give to whomever is trying to bash and attack Israel. I think it is really important that people will act right now, because we find ourselves in the midst of a war on public opinion. Okay, you see the amount of anti-Semitic incidents. You see the rise in anti-Semitism everywhere in the world. One has to remember, this is the only democracy in the Middle East. All the other forces in the Middle East are not democratic, and people have to defend this one democracy. This is also the only one Jewish state in the entire world. And we ask everyone to help us and to help us in this battle on public opinion. We would like to ask our viewers to write letters to their congressmen, to write letters to their politicians so their voice would be heard. We want to ask them to take part in rallies that support Israel. We want to ask them to invest in Israel, to help the Israeli companies that were hurt during this campaign. We want to ask them to play a very important role on social media, all different outlets of social media, to post a post on Facebook, use Twitter, and so on and so forth. First of all, to get all the information, if it's through MFA website, IDF spokesman website, everything is out there. There's a lot of information.
How does the international community really play a part in this, and what has their response been overall?
True. First of all, I want to mention that there are millions of supporters of Israel. They're just being silenced. And you see the difference. You can distinguish the difference between a pro-Israel rally and a anti-Israel rally, a pro-Palestinian rally. The pro-Israel rally, they chant peace. The pro-Palestinian rally, they don't criticize Israel's actions in Gaza. They criticize Israel's existence. They have a problem with our existence. And now I want to come back real quick to what Sharon said. Can you believe this? A Ministry of Foreign Affairs representative just said that she cares for Gazan civilians. Why isn't that on the news? Why isn't that on the media? You know, the international community, the ICC, for example, was established in the first place to deter war criminals, to make sure that what happened to the Jews will never happen again. They were a continuation to the court that prosecuted the Nazis, then their collaborators. So nowadays you see these international bodies, the ICC, the United Nations, that were established on good principles and values in the first place, being taken hostage in the hands of foreign powers with interests. You know, instead of serving justice, these international communities are serving interests to attack Israel, to attack the one democracy in the Middle East. I mean, what do they expect us to do? They criticize Israel for using disproportionate force in the Gaza Strip, and I have to answer to that. What do they expect us? Do they expect us to send Hamas Iron Dome, you know, a few tanks and choppers? Do they? I mean, I understand that they don't want us to exist, but do they really expect us to cooperate with that? We have every right to defend ourselves because I was born and raised here. I was born in the Galilee. If not Israel, where else can I go to? You know, in 1936 or 38, you know, they told the Jews, leave Europe, go to Palestine. Nowadays, they tell us, leave Palestine, go back to Europe. You know, the conclusion is that they don't want us there, they don't want us here, but this is our homeland, so we're not going anywhere. And they have to understand that, including the international community, because Israel could be the greatest ally of the West and the international community. We are number one in preserving human rights, just like Chaim mentioned that, you know, the Air Force, we are number one in taking care of the Palestinians. In fact, we care for the Palestinians more than the Palestinian leadership itself.
So the core values of IDF, we mentioned a few instances here of knocking on the building and all of that, but how else were they expressed in this operation, and were there some real victories that you could mention and share?
I absolutely agree with everything that's been said here. Our enemy is not the Palestinian people. We don't have a problem with Gazans who are born and grow up and they want to go to school and they want to fulfill their potential in life. There's nothing, that's not something that the IDF acts against in any way. Our enemy is the militants inside the Gaza Strip who are taking those civilians hostage. And some of the ways that we relate to that, for example, the roof knocking. These are small ammunitions, they cause no damage, and we drop them on the roofs of buildings to let the people know inside the buildings to get out, and so that they have enough time to leave that building, because that building is a military target. There are intelligence sites inside those buildings, communications, weaponry stockpiles, operation rooms. These are all inside these buildings. So we're letting these civilians get out. In addition, we make phone calls. We're calling these people and we're telling them to get out because we don't want them to get hurt. We have no interest in them getting hurt in these attacks. In the artillery corps, we have unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. We have our newest UAV, the Skylark, the best UAV out there in the market, and we're using this to identify our targets. We're looking at our targets and we're realizing what's around. If there are children, we call off these strikes. I've called off strikes. My colleagues have called off strikes because there are children, because there are non-combatants. We do that all the time. And on the other hand, we can use this technology that we have, these UAVs, and we can identify who's a combatant, who's holding a rifle, who's coming to the border and has weapons on him. And so we use all of these different tools to strike just military targets and make sure that the civilians who aren't involved in the conflict stay safe.
The future. What does the future look like? I mean, this is, I hope to hear it from every one of you. What's the future holding for Israel?
In this area, in the neighborhood that we are, any country that lends its support to us is going to also get condemned by part of the Arab world. But I believe in the Abraham Accords has shown with the UAE, the benefits that redound to them in the long term when they can mute themselves to the anti-Semitic propaganda. It is in not only our interests, but the interest of everybody around us and the world at large for free trade, technology and medicine.
Well, in terms of the Jewish communities all over the world, what is the future holding up for them? Are they more willing to make Aliyah, to come to Israel?
Many of them are considering making Aliyah, but they are also strong. We have just worked on 3 solidarity missions that came from the US to Israel in order to show support for the state of Israel. We are strong, and we will be strong. And one has to understand, we destroyed Hamas capabilities. We are the winners of this campaign. Okay, so just to set the record straight, they lost their terrorist capabilities. And I think that the international community understands that we have to invest in the peace-seeking countries and regimes in our region. And we should fight to the fullest all these elements, whether it's countries of the axis of evil or whether it's vicious, murderous terrorist organizations and militias. We have to fight them in the strongest way possible. And it's, at the end of the day, it's quite simple. You have democracies and democratic values that we are fighting for, and you have murderous, vicious targets of other elements here in the Middle East. And I think that the international community understands what's happening here. Everybody understands that this campaign, especially from the part of Israel, was a campaign of self-defense after this barrage of rockets that were fired at Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the holiest city for the 3 Abrahamic religions, the holiest city. And I think that the international will get together and will put some thought into it in order to bring a better future for this region. We will invest in all our partners, in all our allies, including in the Islamic world, and we will bring more and more countries into the Abraham Accords and to the normalization process. And we will not let all these radical, extreme elements control this area. I think that the future is good, is great both for Israel, both for Israelis, and of course for Jewish communities and Christian communities alike. All the moderate powers that want to seek peace, they will flourish.
The future from the viewpoint of the IDF.
The IDF will continue to defend Israeli citizens. That's our job. That's what we do every day. I wake up in the morning and I work on helping the IDF to defend Israeli citizens. And so we're going to continue investing in the Iron Dome and in these UAVs and these techniques like roof knocking and phone calls. We are going to continue investing in different ways that we can protect our citizens. We are going to continue researching and identifying military targets in the Gaza Strip and in other areas. We're going to continue to find these terrorists and all of these different military capabilities and destroy them, and so that we can keep the state of Israel strong and we can keep our citizens safe.
How does the future look, Hanania?
Everybody must support Israel. And I will tell you why. Don't support Israel blindly. Support Israel because right now these terrorist organizations are knocking, on our borders. But if we don't stop them, they'll come and knock on your borders as well. Do you know a terrorist organization that, once they completed their mission, they'll stop? Obviously not. So supporting Israel means supporting your security as well. Not to mention the fact that Israel helped Europe many times to foil ISIS attacks, terrorist attacks. We have the best intelligence, and we are able to do that very precisely and save the lives not just of Israelis, but Europeans, Americans alike. And what the future looks like in the Middle East, that's a question that I guess a lot of people are asking themselves. And I've been getting a lot of comments from Christians saying, do you think Israel is safe? First of all, I do believe that Israel is safe, probably the safest place to be. And the peacemakers are those that will inherit this land. Obviously, Israel is not the obstacle to peace. We just made peace with 4 Arab countries. So we are not the problem. It is the radicals that are the problem. And the thing is that radicals have no future in a peaceful Middle East. We are a peace-seeking nation, and we are here to stay. And I think that people that ask themselves, okay, so what can I do to support Israel? How can I help Israel from Germany, from Texas, wherever you are? I think that the best thing is to not be silent. Less than a century ago, our people were exterminated because partly because people were silent. When I visited Germany, I saw the trail rails that, they transferred the Jews, and you had villagers that were silent. They just didn't care. So nowadays, I ask you, I beg you, don't be silent. Stand up for Israel. Standing up for Israel is standing on the right side of history. You will not regret this.
To Hanania's point about the greater interest of Israel, this is not just a foreign, exotic, alien conflict that's 5,550 kilometers away from Washington. That's from New York, I'm not sure. That's where I'm from. But especially in this globalized world, it is directly and inexorably tied to the interest, especially of America and the Middle East and the countries that are making deals with us. Energy is usually also a driving factor of war. America depends greatly for a large tranche of its commercial traffic on the Straits of Hormuz and the Suez Canal. And if these are not stable, this can expand outward and affect, like you said, far shores, which are not that far, indeed.
And destabilize the entire world and hurt the world's security.
China understands it. Iran understands it. Russia understands it. This is part of the axis as well. As I said, follow the money. Iran, if you follow the dollar, it all goes back to Iran. And the world and the Middle East has to decide on which side of that divide they stand, because those are the choices. And you spoke of the Abrahamic Accords and the success of that, and we all hope it continues. I believe I could speak for everybody here.
Just as Israel has been fighting a physical war, it has also been fighting another war with unseen aggressors. 2 weeks ago, these aggressors attacked the Jerusalem Prayer Team Facebook page that has 77 million followers. Dr. Mike Evans, who has built this website, thanks to him, we are here at the Friends of Zion Heritage Center campus of the Jerusalem Prayer Team. And we want to promise that as Israel won this last campaign in Gaza, we will also win the media war. Thank you for watching, and please tune in June 9 and 10, Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, from the very heart of Jerusalem and from the Knesset, praying for the peace of Jerusalem, making peace from Jerusalem.